Shalom Aleichem. I'm going to continue reading in the Laws of Prayer, the 5th chapter. We're just beginning. This is the first law. There are 8 matters that one who prays needs to be cautious in them, that he should do them. But if he was pressured or coerced or merely simply transgressed and therefore did not do one of these 8, they do not hold him back. What that means is they do not hold him back from fulfilling his rabbinically ordained obligation to pray. This is in contrast to the 5 things mentioned in the last chapter, chapter 4, which were 5 things which can ma'akivin, that do hold one back from fulfilling his rabbinic obligation, if not taken care of. But these, though one needs to be careful to do them, if he doesn't for whatever reason, even if intentionally doesn't do one of them, they still do not hold him back from fulfilling the rabbinic obligation. And these are they: Amidah wa Nuqah Miqdash, standing and facing in the direction of the Miqdash, the temple in Jerusalem, and the preparing of one's body with the tikkun hamalbush, and the preparing of one's clothing with the tikkun hamaqam, and the preparing of the location where one would pray, and the leveling or lowering of one's voice, and the act of bending down, and prostration. The second law: standing. What is implied? We are not to pray other than in the position of standing. Obviously, within the context of the 8 things, that's with having in mind the exceptions of the specific places where one bends down or prostrates. So other than those particular instances, one is to be standing when praying. Here we're talking about praying the standing prayer, what's called Shmona Esrei or the Amidah. Right, continuing. If one was sitting, whether in a ship or in some sort of carriage, if he's able to stand, he should stand. But if he's not able to stand, he's able to continue sitting in his place and pray. A sick person, what with regard to him, a sick person is permitted to pray even if he is in need to recline on his side. And this is on the condition that he's able to have intention when he prays. If he's not able to have intention when he prays, then he's not even supposed to be praying, because prayer without intention is not prayer, as we found in the last chapter. Intention is one of the 5 things that is absolutely necessary to fulfill the obligation of prayer. And likewise, one who is thirsty or hungry. Behold, these are even included in the category of sick individuals. So we're certainly talking about a serious distracting type of thirst or hunger here. If you are thirsty enough or hungry enough that it would be distracting you from praying, then you should not pray, because you would not be able to fulfill one of the 5 things mentioned in the last chapter, which is the things which distract an individual. So you would fall under the category like a sick person. If he would be able, despite the hunger or the thirst, be able to have intention in his prayer, then he is to pray. And if not, if he's not able to have intention due to the hunger or the thirst, or if he's any other type of sickness, He should not pray until he eats and he drinks, in the case that you're hungry or thirsty, to that extent. If he was riding on an animal, even though he may have a person who's able to hold his animal, he should not get down. Rather, rather he should sit in his place on the animal and pray on the animal. Now it's going to explain why. In order that while he's praying, his mind will be settled with regard to his animal. He won't be thinking, is the person who I allowed to hold my animal dealing with my animal properly or whatever. So you see how fundamental it is that one have intention. That one have intention and not be distracted in prayer. These are 2 of the 5 things mentioned in the last chapter. So they are clearly more a priority than standing, even though ideally, if one is able, he should stand in prayer. Okay, now the 3rd law, what is implied by facing in the direction of the temple in Jerusalem? If he was in the exile, if he was anywhere outside of the land, Israel is often called in Hebrew simply by the term ha'araz, the land. And the exile outside of Israel is often simply called husal ha'araz. It's abbreviated in modern Hebrew simply with the word hol, which also happens to be the word for mundane. Like we say in Habdallah, Hamad bin Qadesh Lahad, who separates between the holy and the mundane. So continuing, what is implied by facing the temple when praying? That one should turn his face in the direction of the land of Israel and pray. So you see the term the land of Israel is not a modern Zionist invention, though other concepts may be. If he was standing in the land of Israel, notice simply referred to as Oras, the land. If one was standing in the land, then he should simply turn his face into the direction of Jerusalem. If one was standing in Jerusalem, then he should turn his face into the direction of the temple if one is standing in Jerusalem. So if you're outside of Jerusalem, you don't need to worry whether or not you're exactly facing the area of the temple. All you need to worry about is facing the area of Jerusalem. And if you are in Jerusalem but not on the Temple Mount, you don't need to be worrying about facing in the direction of any particular part of the temple, but merely facing in the direction of where the temple would be. I don't know, who's this me? Who's this me? I don't know. Anyway, what's up, me? Please identify yourself. Okay, I'll continue reading until I see some kind of question. So, if one was standing in the Mikdash, we're not talking about the Western Wall Plaza here, but actually in the premises of the temple. If one was standing in the premises of the temple, then within the premises of the temple, one should, when praying, face in the direction of the Holy of Holies. And here you see that here you are able to see that one can pray the Shemona Esrei while on the Temple Mount. Baruch haba. Alright. Some, a blind person, one who can't see, and one who is not able to determine the directions of the compass. He has no compass. And likewise an individual who is traveling in a ship. These types of individuals who have no idea in what direction they're going at the moment, when they pray, what should they do? They should simply direct their hearts towards the Shekhinah and pray. So here we have the question, what is the Shekhinah? So the Shekhinah is used in more than one way in Jewish literature. There are two major ways that it's used. One major way, which I think is the most widely known way that the term Shekhinah is used, is in reference to a particular special revelation of God at whatever location or any given moment. And this is a certain revelation of God which is supposed to be perceivable by the senses. So, just that you know, this is not the intention of the Rambam here when he's writing the Shekhinah. The other term for Shekhinah is the awareness that an individual is able to attain, whatever a high degree of awareness that a person can attain of the Creator's existence. And that awareness is attained similar to the first definition that I gave, but still distinct. That awareness is attained by means of the collective indication of God's existence found throughout creation, and by one's own contemplation. When one prays, one should not have any kind of image in his mind that he's praying towards. Even if he realizes that image is not God, he should not establish any kind of image, not Tin Sfirot, not Metatron, not anything. But he should intend his heart towards the awesomeness of God to the extent that he's able to realize. Now the fourth law in chapter 5, the preparing of one's body. What is implied? When one is standing in prayer, or when he is standing, he needs to position his legs, his feet, one next to the other. So his feet should be positioned one next to the other. Like this, not like this, not like that, not leaning like that, but one next to the other. And he should cast his eyes downward as though he is looking at the ground. And his heart should be directed upwards, metaphorically speaking, directed towards God, of course, as though he is standing in the heavens. So he should be, as much as he is able to be, transcending his current surroundings and focusing solely on the existence of God to the extent that he's able to perceive it and be aware. And he should place his hands over his heart, clasped one over the other. The right hand over the left hand. As with several other things, this may sound familiar for those of you familiar with other Middle Eastern religions. So, with his right hand clasped over his left hand, his hands clasped one over the other over his heart, he should stand as a servant before his master. He should stand as a servant before his master with reverence and awe and fear. And he should not place his hands on his side. So the Rambam doesn't say it explicitly here, but we could understand it, that when he says that one should, when the Rambam writes here that one should place one hand over the other over his heart, first of all, the verb is placing. It's not pretty much all of these laws are written in this particular verb form, to be honest, but it gives leeway to interpretation given the last phrase of this halakha, where it says, and he should not place his hands on his side, which seems to indicate, as apparently the son of the Rambam understood, that the point here is that if one is to rest his hands, he's to rest his hands, or if one is to place his hands in any particular place of his body, he should place them over his heart, the right hand over the left. But the point is that his hands should not be on his side in a relaxed manner, different from Shiite Muslims. So there goes that theory of the Wahhabis, that the Shiites copied the Jews, unless they were modern day Jews. But anyway, oh yeah. So in saying that he specifically should not place his hands on his sides, it seems to give leeway that if he's not placing his hands in any particular place, he could be lifting them, which you see indication of throughout the Hebrew Bible. But if he places his hands somewhere, they should be over his heart. The fifth law, the preparing of one's clothing, what is implied? One should fix up or adjust his clothing first of all, alright? And he should make himself look particularly presentable and respectable in his outward appearance. As it is stated, this apparently in the Talmud, it bases this concept that one should prepare his clothing in a respectful, honorable manner on the verse in the book of Psalms, the 29th chapter, the second verse, where it says that one should prostrate to the Lord in the beauty or in the splendor of holiness. And this word hadar definitely can be understood also in a physical sense, that when we prostrate to God, it should be in even in a sense of physical splendor, physical beauty. But that is not all the depth of the word, of course. Alright, continuing. One should not stand to pray, one should not begin to pray merely wearing his undershirt, like his sweatshirt, nor with his head uncovered, nor should he stand to pray with his legs exposed or revealed. If the way or the manner of the people in his particular location is that they will not stand before great individuals, esteemed individuals, unless they have on pants legs, long pants, then he is not permitted to stand in prayer with his legs showing, presumably referring just to the calves. This term, there are two terms here that are kind of tricky. One is raglayim, the other is bet raglayim. So raglayim literally means legs, but it very often refers just to feet. Bet raglayim is referring to some sort of covering, but it's not explicit as to what kind of covering it is. There is a prevalent opinion that bet raglayim is referring to socks. Those who presume you can't pray without shoes simply aren't aware of what the halakha says. It says nothing about shoes. One could pray, even if it's referring to feet, one could pray with their feet covered yet without shoes, using socks, which they did have back then. That is proven by the writings of the son of the Rambam, who talks about socks. But another opinion as to what bet raglayim refers to, literally meaning the house or the house of the legs, is pants legs, like long pants, and that comes from the idea that long sleeves are called ذات يدين. The same term, the same usage of the word house. Okay, so getting back on track. And in no place, in no situation, should one hold tefillin in his hands or a Torah scroll in his arms while he is praying. For his heart or his mind will be distracted by them. Nor should one hold money or any kind of utensil in his hand. But one can pray with a lulav. This is a certain type of plants that we take up during the festival of Sukkot. One is permitted to hold this in his hands because it's part of the commandment of that day. So one can do that during the holiday of Sukkot, the holiday of Tabernacles. Why? Because that is the fundamental commandment, the unique commandment of that day. Here you get the concept of you get the idea that one is not holding a sidur while he prays. One's not holding a prayer book as he prays. That's indicated already twice. One, it's indicated by the statement that one places his right hand over his left hand opposite his heart. And the other place is where it says one should not hold utensils in his hands. Now certainly if a person simply doesn't know the words of prayer, he has no choice, unless he has some kind of stand that he can put the prayer book on and look at as he's praying. But ideally a person will have the words so internalized that they'll be able to flow out of his mouth like a song. And praying with some kind of melody or rhythm definitely helps to do that. Tremendously helps in memorizing. It also helps not to get overwhelmed with trying to pray all the different customary additions that have been added to the Jewish prayer book over the last 1,500 something years, but especially over the last 500 years. As you guys know, we've been working on a prayer book that simplifies Jewish prayer and goes back to the straightforward obligations that we're able to do, cutting away all the additions that simply bog down one's prayer and causes those who try to pray at all, including the additions, from essentially not praying at all, despite praying at all, because they're trying to read so much so quickly that they run through everything like a fast-forwarded cassette tape. Anyway, remember, prayer without intention is not prayer. Continuing. If he had a burden over his head, and the time for prayer arrived, if it weighed less than 4 kabin, let me give you an estimate of what that is exactly. It says nefah shilka hamishal yitrin. So this 4 kabin is approximately the volume of 5 liters. Something pretty heavy. So if I guess a person was on a journey carrying water on his head, as they used to do back then, it's very useful to carry stuff on your head over long distances. I've done it. So if you're doing that, you have something that is the weight of 4 kabin, the liquid volume of 5 liters approximately, and the time for prayer arrived. He should cast it behind him, not throw it, but he should put it behind him and then pray. He shouldn't have it on his head. So I think I mistranslated. If it was less than, not more than, if it was less than the approximation of 5 liters, then he is able or permitted to simply put it on his back. Of course, if he's able to do that. And if it is more than relatively more or less 5 liters, if it is more than that, then he must place it onto the ground. He's not permitted to put it onto his back. And then he should pray. It is the way of all sages or wise Torah scholars and their students. It is the ways of all the Torah scholars and their students that they don't pray except for cloaked in a talit. Talit's not written, but this is the term usually used in reference to a talit, a prayer shawl. Note, it doesn't just say Torah scholars, for those who would say, but I'm not righteous enough or whatever, but even their students. Clearly today's practice is quite different, not just here, obviously. The 6th law, Tikkun HaMuqim, Kisab. So the preparing of the location of prayer, what is implied? So again, this is if one is able to do the following. If the time for prayer is going to pass, so you simply have no possibility of fulfilling the following or anything that we've stated since beginning this chapter, you still are able to fulfill your obligation. But the preparing of the location, meaning where you're going to pray and what the specifications or qualifications that it should have, ideally, is one, that it should be a low location, right? It should be namuch, low. يحذر ويحذر pendant la curta, and one should turn his face towards the wall. So if there's a wall facing in the direction of Jerusalem, he should face the wall, not a beautiful picturesque window with a landscape and little children playing that could distract you, but something which would not distract you. الصريخ يفتح حلانة فصاحين كنار يروشلايم, and one should open windows. This is not just one window. Again, you're not even supposed to be praying in front of a window or a picture or whatever, but if you have windows or doorways in the direction of Jerusalem, then you open the windows and the doors that are in the direction of Jerusalem, in order that he will be able to pray opposite them. That was Aramaic. So he had I don't know what Khawin means. Let's see. Okay, here we got a translation at the bottom. Khawin is Aramaic for windows. Open windows. Okay, so this is quoting the book of Daniel, and the Hebrew translation of the Aramaic that I'm reading is that the prophet Daniel had windows opened ba'aliyata, at his level or floor of the building in the direction of Jerusalem. I think there was a little contradiction. I don't know the explanation for it, so I'm going to keep on. If I get an explanation afterwards, I'll probably post it in the information box of this video after we post it. Continuing in the 6th law, and one should establish a particular location where he's always praying at that location he always prays at. And one should not pray in a abandoned or run down, ruined building, nor behind a synagogue should one pray. But behind a Beit Knesset one is permitted to pray on the condition that he turns his face to the direction of the synagogue, Beit Knesset. Beit Knesset is Hebrew for synagogue. وأصور للشاب بطلها الماز بتفيلة ألا عذور الفناء عن شيرحيق ممنو 4 أماس. So it is forbidden to sit next to one who is standing in prayer, or to pass before him until one distance distances oneself for ammah. Again, we said in the last video that an ammah is a cubit, so one should not sit next to one standing in prayer or pass before him until one is the distance of approximately 4 cubits. Then one may do so. لا يعمد بمقام قبوه شل شوط فوحين أيوثر ويتقلل. One should not stand in a location or a place which is 3 fist breadths high or more and pray there. لا عن قبل مطمع ولا عن قبل كيسة. One should not do this not on a bed or a couch, nor on a chair or on any other such elevated surface. If there was a high building, if the location where one is praying in the high building is the space of 4 cubits by 4 cubits, which is the minimal measure of a room or a house, then it is like a whole floor, and in that case it would be permitted to pray in it. And likewise, if this elevated surface was entirely circumferenced with a blockade or like a fence in all of its directions, even if it is not the space of 4 cubits by 4 cubits, then he is permitted to pray in that particular place. For the height of the elevated area is not recognizable. It won't cause disturbance or whatever, because it is surrounded with some sort of fence or wall. For this particular elevated place has established for itself, even though it's under 4 cubits by 4 cubits, it has established for itself its own space in the merits of the walls that are around it. The 8th law. The artisans or the workers or carpenters, however you want to translate it, who were going about their doings on the top of a wall or at the top of a tree, and the time for prayer arrived. Note, the time for prayer is not almost passing, but it has arrived. They descend from wherever they're at and pray. And when they finish, they go back to their work. And if they were at the top of an olive tree or at the top of a fig tree, they are permitted to pray in their location, even at the top of these trees. For the act of descending is particularly burdensome to descend from these 2 types of trees, whether an olive tree or a fig tree. So this is so as not to take them off of their work. And what do they pray? Those who are working in such situations. If they were working only for the sake of having a meal to eat, and not merely for an hourly salary or whatever, so if they're merely working for meals, then they would be praying the 3 prayers of the 19 blessings. So 3 daily standing prayers. If they were working for a salary and not simply for a particular meal, for one meal which could be day by day, but it's for a salary. So if they're doing it for a salary, they don't do the entire regular standing prayer, the entire regular Shmona Esrei, but rather, if it's their salary, they do what is called Havinenu. Havinenu is the short version of the standing prayer that we pray. And that is found in chapter 3. And in whatever situation, إن يردين لفنها التبع. And in any of these situations that one is occupied in his work, they do not need to go down in front of the teva, in front of the podium in a synagogue, which simply means they don't need to go to the synagogue to pray, such as the Kohanim, the descendants of Aaron, would need to do Birkat Kohanim, the Aaronic blessing. And they don't lift their hands, meaning if they are Kohanim, they should not go make their way out of work just to do the mitzvah, the commandment of lifting hands and blessing the people of Israel. Okay, it wasn't at. Sorry about that. Continuing. The ninth law. The leveling or the lowering of one's voice. What is implied? What is implied by the lowering of one's voice? That one should not elevate his voice during prayer, nor should one merely pray in his heart, non-audibly. Rather, one should express the words with his lips and sound the words of prayer to his ear, but in a whisper. So it should be a whisper that's loud enough for him to hear, but not loud enough to bother other people. Not loud. And he should not make his voice heard. He shouldn't be praying out loud. Unless he is sick or unable to direct or intend his heart to the words of prayer towards God, unless he lifts his voice. So if a person is sick or just in general not able to have intention during prayer unless he lifts his voice more, then he's not permitted to. But if he's in one of these situations that he's not able to have intention unless he lifts his voice, then he's permitted to. But that's on a condition, as we're going to get to. This is permitted. And this is on the condition that he won't be with a communal prayer and praying with community, with other people. In order that he will not cause distraction of their intention during prayer. So this isn't only referring to a minyan, a quorum of 10 Jewish males, but to any group of praying, even if they're not exactly 10, because the intention is not to distract other people who are also praying. Wafa. What are you confused on? And correct, Amital. We are not supposed to just pray the Amidah silently. I mean, if a person doesn't have a tongue, God forbid, then they're able to fulfill the prayer. Okay, good. I hope none of you guys are without a tongue. If so, I apologize. Alright, we are now at the... Thank God, Baruch Hashem. Oh, you don't have it. That's why you're typing so much, Amita. I don't understand, Ali Azhar. What is your question? What is the softest one is allowed to... okay. What is the softest one is allowed to pray the Amidah? So it says that you should pray in a whisper, but it should be audible to your ears. That is in the 9th law of this chapter. And and he should make it audible to his ears, but with a whisper. Alright, now we're at the 10th law. The 10th law begins the subject of bending down. Qari'ah. Qari'ah. Kesav. What is implied by bending down? המתפלל קורע 5 קריאות בכל תפילה ותפילה. The one who prays bends down during prayer 5 times in each and every prayer of the Shmona Esrei, each and every prayer of the Amidah, standing prayer, whatever you want to call it. There are 5 times that the average Jew should do so. So when one bends down in the first blessing, at the beginning of the first blessing and at the end of the first blessing, and also in the blessing of Thanksgiving, which is the next to last blessing of the Shmona Esrei. So in that next to last blessing of the Shmona Esrei, the blessing of Thanksgiving, one also bends down, beginning and at the end. And when he finishes the prayer, korea, he bends down. So there you have 4 places. Twice in the first blessing of the Shmona Esrei, twice in the next to last blessing of the Shmona Esrei, and once upon completing the Shmona Esrei. And what does he do when he bends down at the end of the Shmona Esrei, at the end of the standing prayer? So when he bends down upon finishing the prayer, he takes 3 steps backwards while he is bent down. ونثن شلم مسمول عصمة وحركه يمين عصمة. And he gives peace to his left and to his right. And afterwards he lifts his hand from the act of bending down. Good questions. So we're getting there. If something is not clear once we finish, which we're almost finished with this chapter, but if it won't be clear, then please ask. Important question, obviously. So now you're going to get it word for word out of Mishneh Torah, out of the Halakha, and you'll know that I'm not making it up. Alright. And when one bends down at 4 of these places of bending down, 4 out of the 5 places of bending down, one will bend down at the act of Baruch, the act of worship. So, okay, well there's something to this word Baruch, but I'm going to leave that to the side because it's not practical. It'll just be too much. Anybody who wants to ask, you can ask me afterwards. Elazar, despite whether or not one would, okay, so Elazar asks, I would figure bent at the waist. You're asking about how does one bend down, at the waist or with the knees. Elazar asks, or says, I would figure one bends at the waist. Like in some instances, our place is packed, so it's impractical to bow all the way down. So whether or not the halakha is going to say that one should bend down at the waist or on the knees, being that the act of bending down is one of the 8 matters that if a person is coerced or pressured against doing, then the act of not doing it will not cause him to not fulfill prayer. So if you would not be able to bend down because there's not enough room, then clearly you do not need to be bending down. Certainly it's fine to bend down to the extent that you're able to. If all you can is at your waist, then do so. But even if you weren't able to do that, you could still fulfill your obligation to pray. Certainly you have to take into consideration where you're praying, if you have enough room, or what kind of people you're around. You don't want the way you're praying to cause a reaction that will cause you disturbance while praying. Nor do you want to disturb other people. Alright, continuing. So out of the 5 places at which one bends down in the Shemona Esrei, there are 4 places where one bends down at Baruch, at worship or blessing. Now if you will look at the text of the prayer, you'll see that there actually are only 3 places where one bends down where it says Baruch. So what does it mean here by 4 places where one bends down at the word at Baruch? It doesn't actually say it the word Baruch, it just simply says one bends down at Baruch. So the best explanation I can give for this, besides the presumption that the Rambam may have just made a mistake here, which I don't think is impossible, could be just a mistake, but I think a way of explaining it, being that he didn't say the word, is that he's referring to the concept of Baruch, an act of, at a word or where the concept being conveyed at the moment that one bows there is a concept of worship. And although there are only 3 appearances of the word Baruch in the prayer at which we bow down, there's also another place at the beginning of the prayer of thanksgiving, Hodaya, where the first word is Modim, and Modim is from the root word Hodaya. Alright, that's why this blessing is called the blessing of Hodaya. And Hodaya means gratefulness or thanksgiving, and the word is also related to a word for to glorify or praise, Hod. This all comes back to the root word for Jew, Yehudi. The Hud there is the root, same root for the word in this blessing. So even though it's not the exact word Baruch, it's the same concept of Baruch. And in each of these places where one bends down, he lifts himself back up upon reaching the mention of the name of God. So you bend down at these there are 4 places, and when one bends down, he stays down until he comes to the name of God. That is Adonai. Then he lifts himself back up. The 10th law. With what do these matter? In what case do these matters apply? Behediyot, with a regular individual. So what we just mentioned as to where one bows and where one, when one lifts his head from the bow in the Shmona Esrei, that's only with regard to the average individual. But Aval Kohen Godel Korea B'Tchillat Kol Baracha U'V'Suf Kol Baracha. But a high priest bends down at the beginning and at the end of each and every blessing in the Shmona Esrei. وَهَمَّالَخ, and the king of Israel, once he bows down at the beginning of the prayer, he doesn't lift his head back up until he finishes the Shmona Esrei, until he finishes the prayer. If you are familiar with the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, or if you're familiar with the Gemara, you should know that it is undebatable how the Kohen HaGadol, the high priest, and the king prays. We see several examples of how they pray, and they pray explicitly on their knees. So this is the first indication. And you will notice here that the only distinction made between how a Kohen Gadol, the only distinction made between how a high priest and a king prays and the way an average individual prays is only with when and for how long they bend down. It is not with regard to how they bend down, whether at the waist or on the knees. That is not the distinction made. The 11th law. And why do we give peace upon finishing the Shmona Esrei? Why do we give peace first to our left? We give peace first to the left because an individual's left while he's praying, this is the right opposite his face. So if one is facing him, if there's were to be someone before him, then when I give peace to my right, I'm giving precedence to the... If someone is facing me and I give peace to my left, then that means that I am giving precedence to the right side of the one who I'm facing. And we know that the right side is given precedence in all kinds of actions. So likewise here, and being that we are metaphorically speaking standing in the presence of God, therefore we want to give precedence to the right Not that God has a body, heaven forbid, that's to be understood. That's like class 101, we're a little beyond that. But so to speak, we are giving peace to the right of God first, and then to the left of God, which would be our left first, and our right second, because our right is the left of one in front of us, and our left is the right of one in front of us. So this also teaches how we are to give consideration to those in front of us. I think that that's the main point of the act of giving peace at the end of prayer, to remind us the significance and the purpose of prayer, its significance in fortifying our positive interaction with other people. Alright, so it continues in the 11th law. So why does one give precedence to his own left when he's giving peace? It is to say that it is as though one is standing before a king, because we are standing before the King of Kings, simply not physically, but we act and we live within a physical world. So we do it as though we're standing before a king, giving precedence to the king's right, which would be our left. Therefore we give peace to the right of the king, and then afterwards to the left of the king. And they established, meaning the sages of Israel, they established that one withdraws from the presence of the king in the same manner that one withdraws from the presence of human kings. That is why we are bent down as we take 3 steps back. All of these acts of bending down that have been mentioned before, so one should bend down to the extent that the vertebrae of his backbone poke out, and in doing so he makes himself like an arch. So now we're getting to the answer of your questions asked earlier. Unfortunately, Eliezer has left. Apparently he... whatever. Alright. So first of all it says is to what extent one should arch over his back. And it says to the extent that his backbones poke out and he gives himself the form of an arch. So the simple little like nod kind of thing isn't exactly an arch, I would say. And it'll become very apparent in the next halachot that when one bends down in this manner, he really does look like an arch, as opposed to the way most people today do, which would be better described as a vav or a resh. If you know the shapes of the Hebrew letters, you'd understand what I mean. That the Rambam, if he were referring to the type of bowing that most people do, he would have much more likely referred to it as the shape of a vav or a resh. One who's familiar with the wording of the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah knows that he often refers to the shapes of letters in order to give one a concept of a particular shape. And here he chose the term a bow or an arch as opposed to vav or a resh. So continuing in the 12th law, and if one bowed a bit, only a little, and it pained him, and it is that he is bending over to the ability that he's able, it is of no concern. You don't need to force yourself, cause yourself pain. God doesn't need our prayers even, it's all for us, to His glory, but for our own good. So prostration, what is implied? This is the 13th law. I need to wrap it up. Okay, we'll finish up this 13th law and finish the last 3 laws next week. So what is implied by prostration? After one lifts his head from the 5th bow, upon lifting his head from the 5th bow of the Shemona Esrei, he sits to the ground and falls on his face on the ground. نوفل على بنو أرصى. Can't be more explicit than that. متحنن بخرق تحنونين شيء يرسى. And he makes all the supplications that he desires. So with that, we gotta go. That'll do till next week. We'll pick back up. Shabbat Shalom. Mvorach.